Welcome back. I hope you grabbed some coffee, maybe a snack, stretched your legs a bit. That last chapter was heavy, wasn't it? All that blood and violence, all that loss. But here's the thing about Native American culture, it wasn't all warfare. It wasn't all tragedy. There was beauty too, mystery, spirituality, a connection to something larger than themselves. So let's talk about something that might make you uncomfortable. Something that challenges our modern, rational worldview. Let's talk about magic. Not the card tricks and rabbits from hats kind. Not the stage illusions and sleight of hand. I'm talking about the kind of magic that people believed in so deeply they'd stake their lives on it. The kind of magic that shaped entire cultures. That gave meaning to existence. That connected the physical world to the spiritual. I'm talking about the medicine men. Now, before we go any further, I need to address something. The term medicine man is a bit of a misnomer, a translation that doesn't quite capture the full meaning. In Native American cultures, there was no separation between medicine and magic, between healing and spirituality, between the physical and the metaphysical. A medicine man wasn't just a doctor, he was a priest, a shaman, a conduit between the human world and the spirit world. He could heal the sick, but he could also curse enemies. He could predict the future. He could communicate with the dead. He could call upon the spirits for aid. Or at least people believed he could. And in many ways, belief is what matters. Picture this, you're a Muscogee warrior in the 1830s. Your child is sick, burning with fever, body convulsing, eyes rolling back. You've tried everything you know. The herbs your grandmother taught you. The remedies passed down through generations, the prayers to the spirits, nothing works. Your child is dying, so you call for Kishuswa, the sun, the most powerful medicine man in your tribe. He arrives at your lodge as the sun is setting, and everything about him speaks of power. The way he walks slow, deliberate, commanding, like he owns the very ground beneath his feet. The way he holds his pipe reverently like it's a sacred object, which to him it is. The gravity in his eyes like he's seen things you can't imagine, knows things you'll never understand. He doesn't rush. Medicine men never rush. Haste is the enemy of power. Patience is the ally of the spirits. First the pipe, always the pipe. Watch him prepare it. This isn't just smoking. This is ceremony. This is ritual. This is communion with the divine. He fills the bowl with tobacco, not ordinary tobacco, sacred tobacco. Tobacco that's been blessed, prayed over, prepared with specific rituals. He lights it with a coal from your fire, not with a match or a lighter, those don't exist yet, with a coal, fire from your hearth, your family's fire. And then he smokes. But not like a modern person smokes, not casually, not habitually. He points the stem to the east, blows smoke in that direction, offering it to the spirits of the east, the spirits of dawn, of new beginnings, then to the south, the spirits of warmth, of growth, of life, then to the west, the spirits of sunset, of endings, of transformation, then to the north, the spirits of cold, of hardship, of endurance, then to the sky, the spirits above, the great spirit, the creator, then to the earth, the spirits below, the ancestors, the dead, 6 directions, 6 offerings, 6 prayers. The smoke rises, carrying his prayers to the spirits, asking for their aid, their intervention, their mercy. You watch this, your sick child in your arms, hoping, praying, believing, because what else can you do? Modern medicine doesn't exist. Antibiotics won't be discovered for another century. Germ theory is unknown. Doctors, white doctors, are rare and expensive and often useless. All you have is Kishuswa and the spirits and hope. The medicine man finishes smoking, sets the pipe aside carefully, reverently. Now he begins to work. He chants, in the old language, words you half remember from childhood. Words your grandparents spoke but you never quite learned. The words have power, or so you believe. They're not just sounds, they're invocations, summonings, commands to the spirits. He shakes his rattle, made from a gourd filled with sacred stones, decorated with feathers and beads. The sound cuts through the night air, sharp, insistent, Impossible to ignore. The spirits hear it, they must hear it. How could they not? He places his hands on your child. Warm hands, strong hands. Hands that have healed before. Hands that channel the power of the spirits. You watch, hoping, praying, believing, will it work? Will your child live? That depends on the medicine man's power, on the spirit's will, on fate, on luck, on things beyond your control, beyond anyone's control. But you believe, because you have to believe, because without belief there's only despair. And that's what we're going to explore in this chapter. The world of the medicine men, the power of belief, the intersection of healing and magic, of science and spirituality. It's a world that's mostly gone now, replaced by hospitals and pharmaceuticals and evidence-based medicine. But it was real once, real to the people who lived it, real in its effects if not always in its mechanisms. So let's step into that world. Let's try to understand it, not to mock it, not to dismiss it, but to see it as it was, a world where magic was real, where spirits walked among men, where a medicine man with a pipe and a rattle could save your child's life, or at least where people believed he could. And sometimes belief is enough. Let me introduce you properly to Kishuswa, the son, one of the most powerful medicine men of the Muscogee tribe. We don't know when he was born. The records don't say. Native Americans didn't keep birth certificates or census records. But we know he was alive in the 1830s and 1840s. We know he was respected, feared, revered. We know this because white observers wrote about him. Travelers, traders, government agents. They saw him, talked to him, tried to understand him, and they were fascinated. Because Kishuswa represented something they'd lost. Something their own culture had abandoned centuries ago. A direct connection to the spiritual world. George Catlin, the famous painter, met Kishuswa in 1835. He painted his portrait, and he wrote about him in his journals. Catlin described Kishuswa as a man of about 50 years old, tall, dignified, with an air of authority that was impossible to miss. He wore simple clothes, not the elaborate costumes you might imagine, just a breechcloth and leggings, moccasins, a blanket draped over his shoulders, but he carried his pipe, always his pipe. It was his badge of office, his symbol of power, more important than any crown or scepter. The pipe was made from red stone. Pipestone, they called it, quarried from sacred grounds in what's now Minnesota, grounds that belonged to all tribes, where warfare was forbidden. The stem was wood, decorated with feathers, beads, symbols that had meaning to those who understood them. Kishuswa never went anywhere without that pipe. It was his connection to the spirits, his tool for healing, his weapon against evil. Catlin watched Kishuswa perform a healing ceremony. He described it in detail. The chanting, the rattling, the smoking of the pipe, and he admitted something remarkable, something that must have been hard for a rational, educated white man to admit. He said he felt something, a presence, a power, something he couldn't explain. Maybe it was just the atmosphere, the drama of the ceremony, the power of suggestion, or maybe it was real. Maybe there was something there, something beyond the physical, beyond the rational. We'll never know for sure. But the people who were there, they believed, completely, absolutely. And their belief had power. How did someone become a medicine man? You couldn't just decide one day. You couldn't apply for the job. You were chosen by the spirits, through visions, through dreams. A young man, usually in his teens, would go on a vision quest. He'd go into the wilderness alone, fast for days, pray, wait. And if he was worthy, the spirits would come to him. They might appear as animals, as ancestors, as mysterious beings of light and shadow. They would teach him, give him knowledge, grant him power. They would give him a song, his medicine song, unique to him, a song that would call the spirits when he needed them. They would give him a totem, an animal spirit that would guide and protect him, and they would give him a purpose, to heal, to help, to serve his people. When the young man returned from his vision quest, he would tell the elders what he'd seen, what he'd learned. And if they believed him, if his vision was powerful enough, authentic enough, they would accept him as an apprentice. He would study under an older medicine man, learning the herbs, the rituals, the songs, the prayers, learning which plants healed and which killed, which spirits were friendly and which were dangerous, which ceremonies worked and which didn't. It took years, decades sometimes, to become a true medicine man. And even then, you were never finished learning. The spirits always had more to teach, more to reveal. Kishuswa had been a medicine man for probably 30 years by the time Catlin met him. 30 years of healing, of ceremony, of communion with the spirits. 30 years of successes and failures, of lives saved and lives lost, of power gained and power tested. He'd seen things, done things, knew things, and people respected that, feared it, relied on it. A medicine man's power came from the spirits, but he needed tools, physical objects that channeled that power, that focused it, that made it real. The pipe was the most important, we've talked about that, but there were others. The rattle, made from a gourd or a turtle shell, filled with sacred objects, stones, seeds, bones. The sound of the rattle called the spirits, announced the medicine man's presence, demanded attention. Different rattles for different purposes, a healing rattle, a war rattle, a mourning rattle, each one prepared with specific rituals, each one imbued with specific powers. Then there was the medicine bag. Every medicine man had one. A pouch made from animal skin, usually deer or otter. Inside, sacred objects. Things that had power. Things the spirits had revealed to him in visions. Maybe a stone of unusual shape or color. Maybe a feather from a sacred bird. Maybe a piece of bone from a powerful animal. Maybe herbs, dried plants with healing properties. Or poisonous properties, depending on the need. The contents of a medicine bag were secret, personal. You didn't show them to anyone. You didn't talk about them. To reveal the contents would be to lose their power, to invite disaster. When a medicine man died, his medicine bag was usually buried with him, or burned, or hidden away. The power died with the man. It couldn't be transferred, couldn't be inherited. Each medicine man had to find his own power, his own connection to the spirits. Now here's where it gets interesting, where magic meets science. Because medicine men weren't just spiritual leaders, they were also practical healers. They knew plants, they knew remedies. And some of those remedies actually worked. Willow bark for pain and fever. We call it aspirin now. We synthesize it in laboratories. But the Native Americans were using it centuries before white doctors figured it out. Echinacea for infections, golden seal for wounds, sage for digestive problems. These aren't folk remedies. These are real medicines with real pharmacological effects. Modern science has validated many of them, studied them, extracted the active compounds, turned them into pills. But the medicine men knew them first. Through trial and error, through observation, through generations of accumulated knowledge. They didn't understand the chemistry. They didn't know about alkaloids and tannins and anti-inflammatory compounds, but they knew what worked, and they used it. Of course, they also used things that didn't work, rituals that had no medical value, prayers that couldn't cure disease. But here's the thing, sometimes those worked too, not because of any pharmacological effect, but because of the placebo effect. A sick person who believes they'll get better often does get better. The mind affects the body in ways we're still trying to understand. The medicine men understood this intuitively. They knew that belief was powerful, that hope could heal, that the spirit affected the body. So they combined real medicine with spiritual ceremony, effective herbs with powerful rituals. And it worked, often enough to maintain their reputation, often enough to keep people believing. But let's not romanticize this. Medicine men weren't all benevolent healers. They had power, and power can corrupt. Some medicine men were frauds, charlatans who exploited people's fear and desperation. They'd perform elaborate ceremonies, make grand promises, demand payment. And when the patient died anyway, as patients often did in an era before modern medicine, they'd have excuses ready. The spirits were angry. The patient didn't have enough faith. Someone cursed them, always an explanation, always a way to deflect blame. Some medicine men used their power to intimidate, to control, to punish enemies. They could curse you, or claim to curse you, and if you believed in their power, that curse could destroy you, not through magic, through fear, through stress, through the nocebo effect, the evil twin of the placebo effect. If you believe you're cursed, you might actually get sick. Your immune system weakens. Your body breaks down. You die, not because of magic, because of belief. The medicine men knew this. The smart ones anyway. And some of them used it ruthlessly. Kishuswa, as far as we know, wasn't one of the corrupt ones. The historical record suggests he was genuine, a true believer in his own power. But he lived in a world where medicine men could be dangerous, where spiritual power could be used for good or evil, where the line between healer and sorcerer was thin and easily crossed. Let me describe a typical healing ceremony. Based on eyewitness accounts from the 1830s and 1840s, it's evening, the sun has set. The lodge is lit by a small fire in the center. The patient lies on a mat, covered with a blanket, surrounded by family members. Kishuswa enters, carrying his pipe, his rattle, his medicine bag. He sits by the fire, cross-legged, silent. For a long time he just sits, preparing himself, entering the right state of mind, connecting with the spirits. The family waits, patient, respectful, hopeful. Finally, Kishuswa begins. He lights his pipe, performs the ritual we described earlier, offering smoke to the 6 directions. The smoke fills the lodge, thick, pungent, sacred. Then he starts to chant, low at first, almost a whisper, in the old language, the sacred language. The chant grows louder, more insistent, more powerful. He shakes his rattle. The sound punctuates the chant, drives it forward, gives it rhythm. Shake, shake, shake. Chant. Shake, 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 chant. The family watches, mesmerized. The firelight flickers. Shadows dance on the walls. Kishuswa stands. Still chanting, still shaking the rattle. He circles the patient, once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. 4 is a sacred number. 4 directions, 4 seasons, 4 stages of life. He stops at the patient's head, leans down, blows smoke over them, purifying, cleansing. He places his hands on the patient's body, feeling for the sickness, the evil, the imbalance. His hands move, pressing, rubbing, pulling. He's extracting the sickness, drawing it out, making it visible. Sometimes he'd suck on the affected area, then spit into the fire, showing the family the evil he'd removed. What did he spit out? Probably nothing. Or maybe a small stone or twig he'd hidden in his mouth beforehand. Was it fraud? Maybe. Or maybe it was theater, a way to make the invisible visible, to give people something concrete to believe in. The ceremony continues, for hours sometimes, chanting, rattling, smoking, touching, until finally Kishuswa declares it done. The sickness is removed. The spirits are satisfied. The patient will recover, or not. Sometimes he'd say the sickness was too strong, the spirits unwilling, the patient doomed. Better to admit failure than to be proven wrong later. Did it work? Did people get better? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. If the illness was psychosomatic, caused by stress or fear or belief, then yes, the ceremony could work. The placebo effect is real and powerful. If the illness was minor, something the body could fight off on its own, then yes, the patient would recover, and the medicine man would get the credit. If the medicine man used effective herbs along with the ceremony, willow bark for fever, echinacea for infection, then yes, there might be real medical benefit. But if the illness was serious bacterial infection, viral disease, cancer, then no, the ceremony wouldn't work, couldn't work, and people would die, despite the chanting, despite the rattling, despite the prayers. The medicine men knew this. They knew their limitations. Even if they believed in their own power, they knew it wasn't infinite. Some diseases were beyond them. Some patients couldn't be saved. But they tried anyway, because that was their role, their purpose, their calling, to stand between the people and death, to call upon the spirits for aid, to do whatever they could with whatever tools they had. and sometimes, often enough to matter, it worked. By the time we meet Kishuswa in the historical record, his world is already changing. The Sauks and Muscogees have been in contact with white civilization for decades. They've seen white doctors, white medicine, white technology, and they're becoming skeptical, the young warriors especially. They roll their eyes at the old ceremonies. They question the medicine men's power. If you're so powerful, why couldn't you stop the white men from taking our lands? If the spirits are so strong, why are we losing? Fair questions. Devastating questions. The medicine men had no good answers. Their power was spiritual, not military. They could heal individuals, not save nations. But try explaining that to a young warrior who's watched his world crumble. The faith was fading. The old ways were dying. Kishuswa could feel it, could see it in the eyes of the young people, could hear it in their questions. But he kept performing the ceremonies, kept smoking his pipe, kept calling on the spirits, because what else could he do? This was who he was. This was his purpose. And maybe, just maybe, the spirits were still listening. Here's the thing about medicine men that modern science has finally started to understand. They were both frauds and healers. I know that sounds contradictory, but bear with me. Let me tell you about the placebo effect. You've probably heard of it, but do you really understand how powerful it is? In modern medical trials, they give some patients the real drug. Others get a sugar pill, a placebo. Neither group knows which they're getting. And here's the amazing part. The placebo often works. Not as well as the real drug usually. But it works, people's symptoms improve. Their pain decreases, their depression lifts. Their blood pressure drops. Not because of any chemical in the pill, but because they believe it will work. The mind affects the body. Belief triggers real, measurable physiological changes. Your brain releases endorphins, natural painkillers. Your immune system strengthens. Your stress hormones decrease, all because you believe you're being healed. Now imagine this effect amplified 1,000-fold. Imagine a culture where everyone believes in the power of the medicine man, where that belief has been reinforced for generations, where skepticism doesn't exist. Imagine a ceremony designed to maximize this effect. The chanting, the rattling, the smoke, the drama, the theater, all of it working together to convince you, body and mind, that healing is happening. That's what the medicine men were doing, whether they knew it or not. They were masters of the placebo effect, experts in the power of belief. And it worked. Not always, not for everything, but often enough. But there's a dark side to this. The nocebo effect. If belief can heal, it can also harm. If you believe you're cursed, you can actually get sick. Your immune system weakens. Your body breaks down. There are documented cases of this. People who believed they were cursed and died despite having no physical illness. Voodoo death, they call it. It's real. It's been studied. It's terrifying. The medicine men knew about this too. Some of them used it. They could curse an enemy, or claim to curse them. And if the enemy believed in the curse, it could kill them. Not through magic, through fear. Through the power of belief turned against itself. Kishuswa, as far as we know, didn't do this. He was a healer, not a sorcerer. But he lived in a world where such things were possible, where belief had power, for good or evil. Modern medicine is only now rediscovering what the medicine men always knew. The mind and body aren't separate. They're connected. Intimately. Inseparably. Your mental state affects your physical health. Stress weakens your immune system. Depression slows healing. Anxiety increases pain. And the reverse is true. Physical illness affects your mental state. Pain causes depression. Chronic disease leads to anxiety. The medicine men understood this. They treated the whole person, not just the symptoms. They addressed the spiritual and emotional causes of illness, not just the physical manifestations. A person might be sick because they'd violated a taboo, angered the spirits, lost their way. The medicine man would help them make amends, perform the right rituals, restore balance, and often the person would get better. Not because the spirits were real, but because addressing the psychological and social issues allowed the body to heal itself. It's holistic medicine, mind-body medicine, psychosomatic healing. We have fancy modern names for it now. But the medicine men were doing it centuries ago. There's something else at work here. Something anthropologists and psychologists have studied extensively. The power of ritual. Humans need ritual. We need ceremony. We need structure and meaning and connection to something larger than ourselves. Rituals mark important transitions: birth, coming of age, marriage, death. They give us a sense of control in an uncontrollable world. They connect us to our community. They provide comfort and meaning. The medicine men's ceremonies served all these functions. When someone was sick, the healing ceremony brought the community together. Everyone participated. Everyone believed. Everyone hoped. That communal belief, that shared hope, that collective focus, it had power. Not supernatural power, but psychological power, social power, the power of human connection. The patient wasn't alone in their suffering. They were surrounded by family, by community, by tradition, and that helped. It really helped. Modern medicine has lost this. We've gained antibiotics and surgery and MRI machines, but we've lost the ritual, the community, the holistic approach. We treat diseases, not people. We fix symptoms, not causes. We cure the body but ignore the spirit. The medicine men did it differently, and in some ways better. But let's not get too romantic about this. The medicine men weren't just using placebo effects and rituals. They also had real medicine, real pharmacological knowledge. Let me give you some examples. The Muscogees used willow bark for pain and fever. They'd strip the bark, boil it in water, and have the patient drink the tea. It worked, really worked. Why? Because willow bark contains salicin. When your body metabolizes salicin, it becomes salicylic acid, which is basically aspirin. The Muscogees didn't know about salicin or salicylic acid. They didn't understand the chemistry, but they knew it worked. They'd observed it for generations. They'd refined the dosage. They knew which species of willow worked best. When white doctors finally figured this out in the 1800s, they acted like they'd discovered something new. But the Native Americans had been using it for centuries. The Plains tribes used echinacea for infections, wounds, snake bites. Modern research has shown that echinacea does boost the immune system. It has anti-inflammatory properties. It can help fight infections. The Native Americans were right. The Cherokee used golden seal for wounds and infections. It contains berberine, which has antibacterial properties. It works. Modern medicine uses it. Multiple tribes used sage for digestive problems. It has antimicrobial properties. It can help with indigestion, diarrhea, and other gastrointestinal issues. Again, they were right. I could give you dozens more examples, hundreds even. Native American pharmacology was sophisticated, effective, based on centuries of observation and experimentation. They didn't have laboratories or clinical trials, but they had time, generations of accumulated knowledge. They knew which plants healed and which killed, which parts to use and which to avoid, how to prepare them, how to dose them. This wasn't magic, this was science, empirical science, the kind that comes from careful observation and trial and error. The medicine men were the keepers of this knowledge. They learned it from their predecessors. They tested it. They refined it. They passed it on. And they combined it with the rituals and ceremonies, the spiritual aspects, because they understood something important. Healing isn't just physical, it's also mental, emotional, spiritual. You need to treat the whole person, body and mind, physical and spiritual. Of course, they also got things wrong, lots of things. They used remedies that didn't work. They believed in causes of disease that weren't real. They thought illness could be caused by evil spirits, by curses, by violating taboos. They thought you could cure disease by sucking out the evil, by performing the right ceremony, by appeasing the spirits. None of that is true. Disease is caused by bacteria, viruses, genetic factors, environmental toxins, not by spirits. But here's the thing. Even when they were wrong about the cause, they were sometimes right about the cure. If a patient's illness was psychosomatic caused by stress or fear, then addressing the spiritual cause could actually help. If the ceremony reduced stress, boosted hope, strengthened the patient's will to live, then it had real medical value, even if the underlying theory was wrong. The genius of the medicine men was that they integrated everything. Real pharmacology, placebo effects, ritual, community, spirituality. They didn't separate these things. They didn't say this is medicine and this is religion. It was all one thing, all part of healing, all necessary. And in many cases, it worked better than white medicine of the same era. Remember, this is the 1830s and 1840s. White doctors were still using bloodletting, mercury, laudanum. They were killing as many patients as they saved. The medicine men with their herbs and rituals often had better outcomes, not because their theory was better, but because their practice was more holistic, more humane, less harmful. But by the time we meet Kishuswa in the historical record, skepticism is growing. The Sauks and Muscogees have been in contact with white civilization for decades. They've seen white medicine, white technology, white power, and some of them are starting to question the old ways. The young warriors especially. They've seen the medicine men fail. They've watched loved ones die despite the ceremonies, despite the chanting, despite the prayers. They've seen white doctors cure diseases with their pills and their surgery. They've seen the power of guns and steel and industry. And they're wondering, if the spirits are so powerful, why are we losing? It's a fair question, a devastating question. The medicine men have no good answer. They can say the spirits work in mysterious ways. They can say the people have lost faith. They can blame the victims. But none of that is satisfying. None of that explains why the old ways aren't working anymore. Some Native Americans are converting to Christianity, accepting the white man's religion. The missionaries tell them their old beliefs are false, superstitious, sinful. The Great Spirit is a demon. The medicine men are witches. The ceremonies are devil worship. It's cultural genocide, spiritual colonization. But some people believe it, especially those who have been educated in white schools, who have learned to read and write, who have been taught that white ways are superior. They abandon the old ceremonies. They stop consulting the medicine men. They pray to Jesus instead. And sometimes they get better anyway, because prayer can have the same placebo effect as a medicine man's ceremony. The human mind doesn't care which belief system you use. It responds to belief itself. Kishuswa sees all this, feels it, knows what it means. His power is fading, not because he's lost his connection to the spirits, but because people are losing faith. And without faith, the ceremonies don't work. The placebo effect requires belief. He could adapt. He could integrate Christian elements into his ceremonies. Some medicine men did this, created syncretic practices that combined native and Christian beliefs. But Kishuswa doesn't. He's a traditionalist, a purist. He keeps to the old ways, even as those ways become less effective, even as fewer people seek his help. He keeps smoking his pipe, keeps performing the ceremonies, keeps calling on the spirits, because this is who he is. This is his purpose. This is all he knows. Here's the paradox. The medicine men's power depended on belief, but belief was eroding. Not because the medicine men were failing, but because the world was changing. The old certainties were crumbling. The old ways were dying. The old gods were silent. Or maybe they were never there at all. Maybe it was always just belief, just the power of the human mind to heal itself. But if that's true, then the medicine men were never frauds. They were facilitators, catalysts, channels for the healing power that exists within all of us. They gave people permission to heal. They created the conditions for healing. They mobilized the body's own resources. That's not fraud. That's medicine, real medicine. Just not the kind we recognize anymore. But not everyone lost faith. Some people still believed, still sought out the medicine men, still trusted in the old ways, the elders especially, the ones who remembered the old times. who'd seen the medicine men's power when it was at its peak. They still came to Kishuswa, still asked for his help, still believed in his connection to the spirits, and for them the ceremonies still worked, because their belief was still strong. Kishuswa treasured these people, these last believers. They were proof that the old ways weren't dead, that the spirits were still listening, or at least that belief still had power. Which brings us to the fundamental question: were the medicine men real? Did they really have power? Did the spirits really exist? Did the ceremonies really work? Or was it all just psychology, placebo effects, clever theater? The answer is, it doesn't matter. If the patient got better, does it matter why? Does it matter whether the healing came from spirits or from the patient's own mind? The medicine men would say no. Healing is healing. The source doesn't matter. Modern medicine would say yes. We need to understand the mechanism. We need evidence. We need proof. But maybe both are right. Maybe there's room for both approaches. Maybe we need the precision of modern medicine and the holism of traditional healing. Maybe we need antibiotics and rituals, pills and prayers, science and spirituality. Maybe the medicine men knew something we've forgotten, and maybe it's time we remembered. Let me tell you about one of the strangest and most important ceremonies in Native American culture, the black drink. The Creeks called it a se, or Asini Yahola. Remember Osceola, the Seminole warrior. His name literally means one who drinks the black drink in torrents. Think about that. Your name is basically guy who pukes a lot. But it wasn't shameful. It was sacred. It was an honor. Let me explain. Before important council meetings, the Creek chiefs would gather for the black drink ceremony. They'd brew a tea from the yaupon holly plant, a shrub that grows along the southeastern coast, the only native North American plant that contains significant amounts of caffeine. But it wasn't just caffeine in that brew. There were other compounds, saponins, things that made you vomit, violently. The chiefs would sit in a circle. The medicine man would prepare the drink, chanting, praying, making it sacred. Then he'd serve it in a large shell, passed from man to man. You'd drink a lot, as much as you could hold, and then you'd wait. The caffeine would hit first. Your heart would race. Your mind would sharpen. You'd feel alert, energized. And then the vomiting would start. Not gentle nausea, not polite retching. Violent, explosive vomiting. You'd purge everything in your stomach, and then keep purging. Dry heaves, bile, everything. It was brutal, painful, humiliating, but also sacred, necessary, purifying. Why would anyone do this voluntarily? The idea was purification, spiritual and physical. Empty your stomach, empty your mind. Cleanse your body, cleanse your spirit. Before making important decisions about war, about treaties, about the future of the tribe, you needed to be pure, clear, unclouded by physical or spiritual impurities. The black drink accomplished this, or so they believed. It also served another purpose. It was a test, a demonstration of strength and commitment. If you couldn't handle the black drink, you weren't fit to lead. You weren't strong enough, dedicated enough. The chiefs who could drink the most, who could endure the purging without complaint, they were the true leaders. Osceola was famous for this. He could drink enormous quantities, could purge for hours, could endure what others couldn't. It was a point of pride, a mark of his strength, his dedication, his worthiness to lead. From a modern perspective, what was actually happening? The caffeine was a stimulant. It increased alertness, focus, energy. That's real. That's pharmacology. The saponins caused the vomiting. They irritated the stomach lining, triggered the vomit reflex. The combination stimulation plus purging created an altered state of consciousness. You'd be exhausted, dehydrated, but also wired from the caffeine. Your brain would be in a strange state, hyperalert but physically depleted. In that state you might have visions, insights, revelations, not because of spirits but because of neurochemistry, because your brain was in an unusual state. But the effect was real. The insights were real. The sense of purification was real. Whether it came from spirits or from chemistry doesn't change the experience. Like so many Native American practices, the The black drink ceremony declined with contact with white civilization, partly because the tribes were scattered, broken, no longer holding the great councils that required such purification, partly because Christianity taught them it was pagan, sinful, devil worship, partly because they had access to alcohol now, which offered a different kind of altered state, a different kind of purification, or pollution, depending on your perspective. By the time we meet Kishuswa and the other medicine men in the historical record, the black drink ceremony is already fading, still practiced by some, still remembered by many, but no longer central to tribal life. Another tradition dying, another connection to the past severed. Now let me tell you about a ceremony that makes the black drink look tame, the sun dance. This was primarily a Plains Indian ceremony. The Sioux, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, but it's worth discussing because it represents the extreme end of Native American spiritual practice. The point where devotion becomes self-torture, where faith becomes fanaticism. The sun dance was performed in summer, during the longest days of the year. When the sun's power was at its peak, warriors would make vows, promises to the spirits, usually in exchange for something: protection in battle, healing for a loved one, success in hunting. And then they'd fulfill those vows through the sun dance. Here's how it worked. First, they'd fast for days, no food, limited water, purifying themselves, preparing for the ordeal. Then, on the day of the dance, the medicine man would make incisions in their chest, or their back, or their arms, deep cuts through the skin and into the muscle. He'd separate the skin from the underlying tissue, create loops, pockets of flesh. Then he'd thread ropes through those loops, thick ropes, strong ropes. The ropes would be tied to a tall pole, the sun dance pole, erected in the center of the ceremonial ground, and then the warrior would dance. He'd lean back against the ropes, putting his full weight on them, stretching the skin, tearing the flesh. And he'd dance for hours, sometimes for days, staring at the sun, praying, chanting, enduring. The pain was excruciating, unimaginable. The skin would stretch, sometimes it would tear. Blood would run down the warrior's body, but he couldn't stop, couldn't give up. His vow was sacred. His honor was at stake. He'd dance until the flesh tore completely, until the ropes pulled free, until he collapsed, exhausted, half dead. Only then was the vow fulfilled. Only then would the spirits grant his request. Why would anyone do this? From the Native American perspective, it was about sacrifice, about proving your devotion, about showing the spirits you were serious. You wanted something from the spirits, you had to give something in return. And what greater gift than your own suffering, your own blood, your own flesh? It was also about vision, about transcendence. In that state, exhausted, dehydrated, in agony, staring at the sun, you might have visions. The spirits might speak to you. You might glimpse the other world. Wanata, the Sioux chief we talked about in Chapter 1, performed the sun dance for 4 days. After returning safely from a dangerous journey, he'd made a vow, and he kept it, no matter the cost. When white observers first saw the sun dance, they were horrified. They called it barbaric, savage, proof that Indians were primitive and cruel. The U.S. government banned it in 1883, made it illegal, punishable by imprisonment, not because it was dangerous, though it was, but because it was un-Christian, uncivilized, un-American. The ban lasted until 1934, 50 years. 2 generations of Native Americans who couldn't practice their most sacred ceremony. Some did it anyway, in secret, risking arrest, risking punishment because it mattered, because it was part of who they were, because giving it up meant giving up their identity. Today, the sun dance has been revived. It's practiced again, legally, openly, but with modifications, safety precautions, medical supervision. The essence remains, the sacrifice, the devotion, the connection to the spirits, but the extreme self-torture has been tempered, made safer, more humane. Is it still the same ceremony? Is it still as powerful? The traditionalists would say no. They'd say the suffering is the point, that without the pain, the sacrifice means nothing. The modernists would say yes. They'd say the intention matters more than the method. That you can honor the spirits without destroying your body. Who's right? I don't know, maybe both, maybe neither. But the fact that the ceremony survived through bans, through persecution, through cultural genocide, that tells you something. It tells you how important these practices were, how central to Native American identity, how much they were willing to endure to keep them alive. Let's talk about a gentler ceremony, though gentle is relative. The vision quest. This was how young men and sometimes young women came of age in many Native American cultures, how they found their purpose, their power, their place in the world. When a boy reached puberty around 13 or 14, it was time for his vision quest. The medicine man would prepare him, teach him what to expect, how to pray, how to open himself to the spirits. The boy would fast for days, eating nothing, drinking little, purifying his body, clearing his mind. He'd sweat. In a sweat lodge, a small structure heated with hot stones, sitting in the steam, sweating out impurities, praying, and then when he was ready he'd go into the wilderness. Alone, he'd find a remote place, a hilltop, a cave, a clearing in the forest, somewhere far from the village, far from other people, and he'd wait for days, sometimes a week or more. No food, no water, no shelter, just himself and the spirits. He'd pray, he'd chant, he'd stare at the sky, at the stars, at the sun. He'd wait for a vision, for a sign, for the spirits to reveal themselves, and if he was worthy they would come. The vision might come as a dream or a waking hallucination. The line between the two was blurred. He might see an animal, a bear, an eagle, a wolf. The animal would speak to him, teach him, give him power. That animal would become his totem, his spirit guide, his protector. He might see an ancestor, a dead relative. They'd give him advice, wisdom, a mission. He might see strange beings, spirits, gods, things that had no name in the human world. They'd give him a song, his medicine song, unique to him, a song that would call the spirits when he needed them. They'd give him knowledge, secrets, power. And they'd give him a purpose, a role to play, a path to follow. When the vision came, the boy would return to the village. He'd tell the medicine man what he'd seen, what he'd learned. And if the vision was powerful enough, authentic enough, the medicine man would accept it. The boy would be given a new name, based on his vision, based on his totem. He was no longer a boy. He was a man with a purpose, with power, with a place in the world. From a modern perspective, what was happening? Fasting, dehydration, sleep deprivation, sensory isolation. All of these create altered states of consciousness. They affect brain chemistry. They can cause hallucinations. The visions weren't coming from spirits. They were coming from the boy's own mind, stressed, exhausted, desperate for meaning. But does that make them less real, less meaningful? The boy believed the spirits spoke to him. That belief shaped his identity, his choices, his life. The vision gave him purpose, direction, confidence. Whether it came from spirits or from his own subconscious doesn't change its effect. Kishuswa had his own vision quest, as a young man, probably around 1810 or 1815. We don't know the details. He never told white observers. It was too sacred, too personal, but we know he saw something, learned something, received something, because he became a medicine man. And you couldn't become a medicine man without a powerful vision. The spirits chose him, or he chose himself, or both. And for the rest of his life he served that vision, that calling, that purpose, even when the world changed, even when people stopped believing, even when the old ways were dying. He kept faith, kept serving, kept calling on the spirits, because that's what his vision demanded, that's what his purpose required. And maybe in the end that's all any of us can do, follow our vision, serve our purpose, keep faith. Even when the world tells us we're wrong, even when everything is changing, even when we're the last believers, because some things are worth believing in, some purposes are worth serving, some visions are worth following, even if they're just in our heads, even if the spirits aren't real, because belief itself is real, purpose itself is real, vision itself is real, and sometimes that's enough. Kishuswa lived to see his world change, fundamentally, irrevocably. The buffalo were disappearing, hunted to near extinction by white hunters. The great herds that had sustained the plains tribes for centuries gone. The white settlers were spreading, like a flood, like a plague, unstoppable. The old certainties were crumbling. The old ways were dying. The old gods were silent, or maybe they were never there at all. Kishuswa kept smoking his pipe, kept performing the ceremonies, kept calling on the spirits, but fewer people came to him, fewer people believed. The young warriors especially. They'd seen too much, lost too much, suffered too much. They'd watched the medicine men fail, watched their prayers go unanswered, watched their people die despite the ceremonies, and they'd concluded the spirits are gone, or they never existed, or they've abandoned us. Any of those options led to the same result. The medicine men's power was broken, but Kishuswa didn't stop, couldn't stop. This was who he was, this was his purpose, this was all he knew. When someone came to him, one of the old believers, one of the faithful, he'd perform the ceremony with the same solemnity, the same devotion, the same absolute conviction. He'd smoke his pipe, point the stem to the 6 directions, offer smoke to the spirits. He'd chant in the old language, shake his rattle, place his hands on the patient. He'd do everything exactly as he'd been taught, exactly as he'd done for decades, and sometimes it still worked, for those who still believed, for those whose faith was still strong. The placebo effect doesn't care if you're the only believer left. It only cares that you believe. Some of Kishuswa's people converted to Christianity, accepted the white man's God, rejected the old ways. The missionaries told them their old beliefs were false, demonic, sinful. The Great Spirit was Satan. The medicine men were witches. The ceremonies were devil worship. It was cultural genocide, spiritual colonization. But some people believed it, especially those who'd been educated in white schools, who'd learned to read the Bible, who'd been taught that white ways were superior. They abandoned the old ceremonies, stopped consulting the medicine men, prayed to Jesus instead. Did it help them? Did they find peace? Did they find healing? Some did, some didn't. Same as with the old ways, because real healing doesn't depend on which God you pray to. It depends on belief, on hope, on the will to live. The human mind doesn't care which belief system you use. It responds to belief itself. We don't know exactly when Kishuswa died. The records don't say. Native Americans didn't keep death certificates, but he was probably in his 60s or 70s, old for that era. Old for a life lived in hardship and uncertainty. Did he die believing? Did he still have faith in the spirits, in his own power? Or did he, in his final moments, doubt, wonder if it had all been a lie, a delusion, a waste? We'll never know, but I like to think he died believing, because what else did he have? His world was gone, his people were scattered, his power was broken. But his faith, that was his, that couldn't be taken from him. And maybe in the end, that's all that matters. Not whether the spirits were real, but whether he believed they were, because belief gave his life meaning, purpose, direction. And isn't that what we all need? Meaning, purpose, direction. Whether it comes from spirits or from within ourselves, does it really matter? So what's the legacy of the medicine men? What did they leave behind? First, the pharmacological knowledge, the understanding of plants and their healing properties. Much of this has been lost. When the medicine men died, they took their knowledge with them, but some survived, passed down through families, recorded by anthropologists, preserved in tribal traditions. And modern medicine is finally starting to pay attention, to study these traditional remedies, to validate what the medicine men knew all along: willow bark, echinacea, golden seal, sage, and hundreds of others. Real medicine, real healing, real knowledge. The medicine men weren't just shamans. They were scientists, empirical researchers, pharmacologists. They deserve recognition for that, respect for that. Second, the holistic approach to healing, the understanding that mind and body are connected, that you can't treat one without the other. Modern medicine is rediscovering this. Mind-body medicine, psychosomatic healing, the placebo effect. We're learning that stress affects physical health, that depression slows healing, that belief can cure or kill. The medicine men knew this. They practiced it. They built their entire healing system around it. We abandoned that approach. We separated mind from body, spirit from flesh, medicine from religion, and we lost something important. Now we're trying to get it back. Integrative medicine, holistic health, treating the whole person, not just the disease. The medicine men were doing this centuries ago. We're just catching up. Third, the importance of ritual, of ceremony, of community. Modern medicine has lost this. We've gained technology and precision, but we've lost the human connection, the communal support, the sacred space. When you're sick today, you go to a sterile hospital. You're treated by strangers. You're surrounded by machines. It's effective. It saves lives. But it's cold, impersonal, isolating. When you were sick in Kishuswa's time, the whole community gathered. Your family was there. The medicine man performed a ceremony. Everyone participated. Everyone believed. Everyone hoped. You weren't alone in your suffering. You were surrounded by love, by support, by tradition. That mattered. That helped. That healed. We need to bring some of that back. Not the superstition, not the ineffective treatments, but the humanity, the community, the ritual. Finally, the medicine men remind us that there's mystery in the world. Things we don't understand. Things that can't be explained by science alone. The placebo effect is real, but we don't fully understand it. We can measure it, study it, but we can't fully explain it. The mind-body connection is real, but it's complex, mysterious, not fully mapped. Human consciousness itself is a mystery. We don't know how it arises, how it works, what it really is. The medicine men didn't have answers to these mysteries, but they acknowledged them, respected them, built their practice around them. Modern medicine sometimes forgets this. We think we have all the answers. We think science can explain everything, but it can't. Not yet, maybe not ever. There's still mystery, still wonder, still things beyond our understanding. The medicine men knew this, and maybe we should remember it. I'm not saying we should go back to the old ways. I'm not saying we should abandon modern medicine for herbs and rituals. Modern medicine is a miracle. Antibiotics save millions of lives. Surgery repairs what was once irreparable. Vaccines prevent diseases that used to kill children. We should be grateful for that, proud of that. But we should also remember what we've lost. The holistic approach, the community support, the acknowledgement of mystery. And maybe we can integrate the best of both worlds. The precision of modern medicine with the humanity of traditional healing. The antibiotics and the rituals, the surgery and the ceremony, the science and the spirituality. That's what the medicine men would want, I think. Not to replace modern medicine, but to complement it. To remind us that healing is more than just fixing the body. It's also about healing the mind, the spirit, the community. It's about treating the whole person in all their complexity, in all their mystery. That's the legacy of the medicine men. That's what Kishuswa and his colleagues left behind. Not magic, not superstition, but wisdom. Hard-won wisdom about what it means to be human, to suffer, to heal, to hope. And that wisdom is still valuable, still relevant, still worth remembering. Take a break, stretch, get some water. When you come back, we'll talk about the warriors, the men who fought with steel and stone, not spells and smoke. But remember, in the Native American world, there was no separation between the spiritual and the physical. Every battle was also a spiritual contest. Every warrior was also, in his way, a medicine man. The line between healer and fighter was thin, sometimes non-existent, because survival required both, physical strength and spiritual power, weapons and faith. We'll explore that in the next chapter. The warrior's path, the art of war, the price of resistance. It's a different kind of story, but connected to this one, because everything in Native American culture was connected. The medicine men, the warriors, the chiefs, the people, all part of one whole, one culture, one struggle for survival. See you in a few minutes.